I want to give you a personal testimony of a savage storm that I went through. I have debated for months whether to tell this personal story of crisis to my church.
For 6 decades, Pastor John Hagee told millions of people exactly when the world would end. He pointed to wars, named the nations, and declared that the blood moons were unmistakable signs that God was speaking to humanity. To his followers, he was a man who spoke with complete confidence about the future. Then, at 85, sitting in a chair because his body could no longer support him, John Hagee admitted something that stunned many who had trusted him and changed how they viewed the man behind the prophecies. The confession nobody saw coming. In April of 2025, John Hagee's ministry celebrated his 67th anniversary. There were ceremonies in Jerusalem at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center, where he received the Support of Israel Award. He was honored at the Jerusalem Great Synagogue. Malcolm Hoenlein of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations stood in front of cameras and said plainly that most people do not understand what John Hagee has actually done for the Jewish people. He called it a mission to improve the world. And if that were the whole story, you would walk away thinking this man is untouchable. But something had shifted inside him long before those honors arrived, and if you watched closely enough, you could see it. In October of 2020, John Hagee got ill with COVID at 80 years old and was hospitalized for 15 days with double pneumonia. His son Matt had to walk to that pulpit on a Sunday morning and tell the congregation that the man who was always supposed to be the strongest person in the room was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. Benjamin Netanyahu personally tweeted prayers for his recovery, calling him the best friend Israel had ever had. When Hagee finally returned to Cornerstone Church, he did not walk up to the pulpit. He sat in a chair. He told the congregation he was sitting in that chair as a testimonial to the healing power of God. That was a confession from a man who had been humbled by it. And then he said something that a man like John Hagee is simply not supposed to say. He told his congregation that sometimes faith is not about having the answers. Sometimes it is about trusting God with the questions you cannot answer. A longtime member of Cornerstone, who had attended services for over 20 years, described that moment in terms that will stay with me. She said she had spent 2 decades watching this man declare nuclear wars, name the Antichrist, and tell her exactly what every headline in the newspaper meant, according to Scripture. And now, he was saying he did not have all the answers. She said it was the first time she had ever felt like he was talking to her as a human being, instead of teaching her like a student. And that feeling makes sense when you understand that this was not the first time John Hagee's body tried to shut him down. Before COVID, he had undergone quadruple bypass open-heart surgery in 2008. Before that came a diagnosis of myasthenia gravis, a serious neuromuscular disease that attacks the muscles needed to speak, which means it went after the one tool a preacher cannot survive without: his voice. But the illness that almost killed John Hagee at 80 was not the first time his entire world collapsed around him. And the story of what destroyed him at 35 is one his ministry has spent 50 years trying to bury. The scandal that should have ended everything. In 1975, John Hagee stood before the congregation of Trinity Church in San Antonio and read a letter that he had written himself. The letter was a public confession. He told his congregation that he was guilty of immorality. He did not use more specific language than that in the letter, but the circumstances surrounding it told a story that no amount of careful wording could hide. He was in the final year of a marriage to his first wife, Martha Downing, whom he had married in 1960. They had 2 children together, a son named Christopher and a daughter named Tish. According to court documents from the custody dispute that followed, Martha accused him of immoral behavior. When the divorce was finalized, Martha was awarded full custody of both children. Reports also surfaced of domestic violence incidents within the marriage. Martha Downing later remarried and built a second family. Within months of that public confession, Hagee married Diana Castro, a woman who had been a member of his own congregation at Trinity Church. The remarriage happened on April 12, 1976, almost exactly 1 year after the confession. The speed of that remarriage led to widespread allegations that he had been involved with Castro while he was still married to Downing. The backlash was immediate and devastating. Being a divorced pastor in conservative evangelical Texas in the mid-1970s was not just personally painful, it was professionally fatal. Members of his own congregation turned against him. His credibility collapsed. His ministry at Trinity Church was finished, and he was forced to resign at 35 years old. And the most uncomfortable part of this story is what came decades later. In September of 2022, Hagee posted publicly that the only marriages God will ever recognize are between a man and a woman. The internet immediately reminded him about Martha Downing. Investigative journalist Sarah Posner, who wrote God's Prophets, Faith, Fraud, and the Republican Crusade for Values Voters, has documented how Hagee's personal history directly contradicts the moral standards he demands from everyone else. But the collapse at 35 was also the beginning of something new. Weeks after his world fell apart, Hagee started a new church called The Church at Castle Hills, with 25 members. Diana Castro became far more than a second wife. She sold a farm with him so they could buy television cameras when the church board refused to fund the broadcast ministry. She co-directed Christians United for Israel, organized events for every branch of the Hagee Empire, and became the infrastructure of everything he would build from the ashes of his first life. And that empire, once it started growing, generated the kind of money that most congregations never even think to question. The money behind the ministry. According to IRS filings that Texas Monthly reviewed, John Hagee's direct compensation from Cornerstone Church and Global Evangelism Television, now known as John Hagee Ministries, exceeded $700,000 in 2004. That figure did not include royalties from more than 40 books, revenue from merchandise sold at stands throughout the church foyer, or income from a 60-page product catalog. By later estimates, his total annual salary from ministry organizations exceeded $1.3 million. Reports noted that a large percentage of this income was tied to roughly 16 hours a week of actual work. What makes the financial picture more troubling is the governance structure. Diana Hagee, Matthew Hagee, and John Hagee are listed on the 990 tax filings as 3 of the 4 officers of Global Evangelism Television. The 4th is the church's chief financial officer. Ole Anthony, president of the Trinity Foundation, a Dallas-based watchdog group that investigates television evangelists, stated publicly that this arrangement creates a serious conflict of interest because the officers are essentially setting their own salaries and benefits. Meanwhile, during Sunday services at Cornerstone, ushers take positions in the aisles with platters. Hagee instructs church members to hold their money toward the heavens and repeat after him. He has told his congregation that giving qualifies them to receive God's abundance, and that if God gives to them before they give to him, God himself would become a liar. The church grew from a bare concrete slab into a 5,000-seat sanctuary that people called Vatican II because nothing that large had ever been built in that part of San Antonio. Cornerstone eventually reached more than 22,000 active members. The broadcast ministry expanded to 160 television stations and 50 radio stations, reaching 99 million homes across more than 200 nations. And all of that reach gave John Hagee something far more dangerous than wealth. It gave him a platform large enough to tell the world exactly when and how everything would end. And millions of people believed every word, even when the deadlines passed and nothing happened. The prophecies that failed. In 2006, Hagee published Jerusalem Countdown, a warning to the world. The book predicted that Iran would obtain nuclear weapons by October of that same year and trigger a conflict prophesied in Scripture. He wrote that Russia and Islamic nations would invade Israel and be destroyed by God, and that the Antichrist, who he described as the head of the European Union, would create a final confrontation between China and the West over the fate of Israel. October of 2006 came and went. Iran did not obtain nuclear weapons. The war did not happen. Hagee never formally retracted the timeline. He simply moved forward. When the book was later updated, the same essential claim appeared again, asserting Iran would have the bomb within 2 years. That deadline also passed without fulfillment. Then came the blood moons. In 2013, he published 4 blood moons. Something is about to change. The book declared that 4 consecutive total lunar eclipses falling on Jewish holidays in 2014 and 2015 would signal world-changing prophetic events connected to Israel. He tied the theory to historical parallels, arguing that previous tetrads had coincided with the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, the establishment of Israel in 1948, and the recapture of Jerusalem in 1967. The eclipses came and went. 3 of the 4 were not even visible from Israel. No prophetic event occurred. Theologians and scholars publicly criticized the claims. Hagee never issued a public apology. He moved forward again. As recently as July 5, 2026, he preached a sermon titled 10 Prophetic Signs Happening Right Now. The cycle continues. Urgent declarations followed by silence when the timelines expire, followed by new declarations that keep the audience locked in. But the failed prophecies were not what cost John Hagee his most powerful political alliance. That price was paid by a single sermon from the late 1990s that surfaced at the worst possible moment. The sermon that burned a presidency. In February of 2008, Senator John McCain accepted John Hagee's endorsement during the presidential campaign. Then audio surfaced from a sermon Hagee had delivered in the late 1990s. In the recording, he quoted the book of Jeremiah and stated that God sent a hunter, that a hunter is someone who comes with a gun and forces you, and that Hitler was that hunter. He said God allowed the Holocaust to happen because God's top priority for the Jewish people was to get them to return to the land of Israel. He also claimed that Hitler descended from a lineage of what he called half-breed Jews, and suggested that Jewish people bore some responsibility for the persecution they suffered because of their disobedience and rebellion against God. The fallout was catastrophic. The ADL condemned the remarks. The Catholic League labeled him an anti-Catholic bigot for years of statements calling the Roman Catholic Church the whore of Babylon and a false cult system. He had told NPR's Terry Gross that Hurricane Katrina was the judgment of God against New Orleans because the city had been planning a gay pride parade. When Gross asked him if he believed all Muslims have a mandate to kill Christians and Jews, he responded that the Quran teaches that very clearly. McCain publicly rejected the endorsement, calling Hagee's remarks crazy and unacceptable. Within 30 minutes, Hagee withdrew the endorsement himself. He issued a written apology to Jewish leaders. The ADL accepted it, but the damage was severe. What makes this part of the story so unsettling is that the exile did not hold. By 2018, Hagee stood at the opening of the American Embassy in Jerusalem and delivered the closing benediction. By November of 2023, he was invited to speak at the March for Israel in Washington, alongside Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Mike Johnson. Jewish organizations condemned his inclusion, but no rabbis were invited to speak. John Hagee was, and the machine that made all of that possible is one that most people still do not fully understand. The largest pro-Israel organization in America. On February 7, 2006, 400 evangelical pastors gathered at Cornerstone Church. John Hagee announced the founding of Christians United for Israel. Within 12 years, it grew to 5 million members. Today, it claims over 10 million, making it the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States, larger even than AIPAC. It helped pass legislation in 34 states and drove over 135,000 emails to the White House in support of moving the American Embassy to Jerusalem. His annual Night to Honor Israel has raised over $100 million for Israeli and Jewish causes. But the theological engine powering CUFY is where the entire story takes a turn that most supporters never fully process. Christian Zionists like Hagee believe that the establishment of Israel and its continued expansion are necessary precursors to the return of Jesus Christ and the coming of the apocalypse. Once that final drama begins, all people will be judged, and anyone who does not accept Jesus as Christ will be condemned to eternal damnation. That includes every Jewish person who remains Jewish. Hagee's own spokesperson confirmed in 2015 that Hagee does believe Jewish people need to accept Christ to be saved. The clarification was issued defensively after a publication suggested he held a more inclusive theology. His team firmly denied it. Abraham Foxman, then the national director of the Anti-Defamation League, stated that Christian Zionist support for Israel is about their own salvation, not Jewish salvation, and called the entire project morally offensive. And the company Ko-Fi has kept inside Cornerstone Church raised even deeper concerns. In November of 2021, the church hosted the Reawaken America Tour, featuring former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, and InfoWars founder Alex Jones. Flynn told the crowd that if America was one nation under God, it needed one religion. The crowd chanted coded obscenities against President Biden inside the sanctuary. Video surfaced of Matt Hagee personally welcoming them. He later apologized, but by 2023, 3 of the top 5 Republican presidential candidates had appeared at Hagee's church seeking his blessing. 10 million followers, $100 million raised, and direct access to every Israeli prime minister for 4 decades. But the man who built all of it was quietly losing the one thing none of that power could protect. And the battles happening inside his own body were about to force a reckoning that no political connection could postpone. The man behind the machine. John Charles Hagee was born on April 12, 1940, in Baytown, Texas, into a house with no television. The family sat on the front porch in the evenings and played music together. His father played guitar. His mother played piano, organ, and accordion. Young John played saxophone. He came from a 5th-generation pastor family, which means the ministry had been running through the Hagee bloodline for over a century before he took his first breath. But the teenager wanted nothing to do with any of it. He was the captain of his high school football team. He was a 4-sport letterman. He made the National Honor Society. He won the American Legion Award for Most Outstanding Student in his graduating class. Senator Lyndon B. Johnson, who would later become the President of the United States, personally arranged a West Point appointment for him. John Hagee was going to be a soldier. Then came the last Sunday of January in 1958. He was 17, sitting inside a revival at his father's church because his parents made him go. Something happened that night that he has never been able to fully articulate. He walked to the front of the church and prayed what he later called the most honest prayer of his life. He told God that if there were other plans for him, God needed to take away his desire for West Point. He kept the prayer short because he meant every word of it. Within days, the appointment was gone, not because anyone rescinded it, because John Hagee no longer wanted it. 10 days later, he enrolled at Southwestern Assemblies of God University. Before his 18th birthday, he preached his first sermon from Luke chapter 23 and titled it, "The Place Called Calvary." He later said he never looked back. At 86 years old, still preaching as of July 2026, still broadcasting on 160 television stations, still reaching 99 million homes, John Hagee remains both the man his critics describe and the man his supporters defend. He has spent 6 decades telling the world exactly how everything will end. And the one thing that genuinely changed him is realizing he cannot control how his own story ends. He said in interviews that the worst seasons of his life taught him patience, humility, and the understanding that faith is not about having every answer. Those words carry a completely different weight when you know the full story of everything he lost, everything he built on top of those losses, and everything his own body tried to take from him before he was willing to say them out loud. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what you think the quiet version of John Hagee really means.